Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we have a couple people that are still might be filing in, but I do want to respect everybody's time, so I always like to start exactly on time, so we can have the time needed to dedicate to everyone. So thank you for those that came today. This is our first meeting of the year, and obviously with new staff and everybody coming in. What I'd love to do is have everybody introduce themselves. On the slide presentation, on page 3, I have our Board of Education listed. And if we can just start with our Board of Education members that are here first, introduce themselves, and then we'll go from there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm LaTanya Williams. I'm the president of the Board of Education.
Kim Miller.
Tom Richmond. Gary, how you doing?
Good, Tom. Gary Williams.
Okay, on the next page, we have the folks from district office that are here today, so we'll just start at the top of it.
Ashley Megas. Somewhere.
And then Donna, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sorry, Donna Baker, I'm board secretary.
Robert Hedgecourt, assistant superintendent of operations and business.
Jenny Powers, I'm the controller.
And then Katie Knive is out on maternity leave, so she's not here with us today.
Becky Dunn, Director of Communications.
And we have John Morris over there in the corner who's filming today's activities. All right. So on the next page, I have our community representative. So if you wouldn't mind, for those that are joining us from the community, if you introduce yourself and kind of talk about a little bit about yourself and your background in the community, and maybe what company you work for. So, looks like Wade's.
I'll introduce Wade.
Okay.
I'll go ahead. I'm next on the list. Dennis Rozanki, Chief Financial Officer at Meyerhofer Funeral Home and Crematory. Transplant to the community, but I grew up in Iowa, but I've lived here now since '96, so this is home. 2 adult daughters who graduated from Central High School, who got a great education, and it's one of the reasons I support the school district and talk about it, because it did right by me. Daughters had plenty of activities, played sports, were involved, got a great education, and I feel that we can still do that. So that's easy work for us to do. So I've been on this committee in the past before it was terminated. I sat on it for 2 or 3 years, so I'm fairly familiar with this and looking forward to being back.
Great. No, thanks, Dennis.
Welcome.
Just go around the room if you want to.
Lori Dracula. I'm born and raised in St. Joe. Me and my husband and 2 girls both went to the Hosea Spring Garden, Benton, graduated. We've owned several businesses. Dragon Metal Works was the one that I'll say was the one we had the longest, 30+ years, and sold it a few years ago, so now I'm retired and enjoyed life home on the farm with all my grandkids that live on the farm with us and our kids.
That's awesome.
Both the girls work here in town. Our youngest is a nurse at Mosaic with her husband, highway patrolman, and our oldest daughter and her husband run one of our businesses.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Thanks for being here.
My name is Joe Volkmer. I also born and raised in St. Joe. Very proud of the community. Currently work at Triumph Foods, Senior Director of Business Support, so I'm responsible for FP&A, margin management, training and purchasing. Prior to that, I was our controller for the last 7 years. I'm a recovered public accountant, so there's still a few letters behind my name that took too long to study for, that I'm yet to let it go inactive, but one of these years I'll probably quit doing the CPE. But my wife and I live in St. Joe, and we have a 14-month-old who, although not in school yet, I think he wants to be, so very excited to be involved and appreciate everybody here.
Absolutely. No, thank you.
I'm Teresa Simmons, born in St. Joe, through the St. Joe School District, all the way. My kids are the same. My daughter is a 21-year teacher here in the district. I was a co-chair for Vision Forward, so we got down into a lot of the weeds during that process. I work for MoCan Development, where we do SBA loans. I'm the loan officer there. where we do government loans for businesses in the community. And I'm glad to be on the committee. I was not sure whether it was time for somebody else to take this spot. So I'm hoping that we can put some answers together, or maybe look at some and put some different eyes on things. So, and I fully support Dr. McGinnis and everything that she does.
Thank you.
So.
Thanks for being here.
Gary Wilkinson, likewise from St. Joseph, served in a number of capacities here with the city. Currently a remodeling contractor, served with the city council member. Also served on this committee a few years ago, so got a little background in that. And have grown up in this school district, kids, grandkids in there now, so very interested.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. All right, well, we'll just jump right in. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my name is Skylar Smith, and I apologize for my tardiness. I'm coming in from Columbia, Missouri. I split my time in between my last year of law school and living in St. Joe. And I'm just excited to be on this committee and to have an opportunity to work on some real solutions and put our school district on a better path forward.
Awesome. No, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things is when, we talk about finance committees, you guys have mentioned a little bit of the history of having the committee and then having it be dissolved and having it come back in is, kind of those roles and what the role of the committee is. So I feel like it'd be important just to kind of talk through that. Of course, and on a bigger level, when you talk about the Board of Education, they are our governing body. And when you look at the Board of Education, if you look at any organizational chart, they're at the top. You have your Board of Education and then some show actually the community above that, because the community votes in the Board of Education that then has one employee who is our superintendent of schools, Dr. Ashley McGinnis. And then from there, you see it branch off into different departments, and whether it's the educational side or support staff side of how that's, looks at your roles and responsibilities in your district. And so, within the Finance Committee, what we're looking for is that outside perspective. Sometimes we're in the weeds every single day, and, a lot of times getting, advisory information from folks that have that 10,000-foot view, or that view that we don't see because we're so close to it that sometimes we don't step back. And so, we want this committee to provide guidance to us and recommendations on different financial matters. One thing to note that I have in here is, final decisions do, rest with the Board of Education. And so any type of recommendations that would come out of the committee, the ultimate approval is your Board of Education, who's your governing body for anything that we do. We hope to be a planning role to help us align our resources with our district's mission, vision, and our CSIP. Our CSIP is our Comprehensive School Improvement Plan. And so we have been through the process, and I can let Dr. McGinnis talk more about this, but revising that plan and having departmental improvement plans as well. And so that's always an exciting process to go through. And that plan should always be, it's not a standing document. In other words, if that plan is always evolving, you're always working toward, I'm sorry.
I have another KQ2 here. Do I just let them in?
Yeah, that's fine. So that plan is always being looked at and evaluated as data comes in year after year for whether it's financial data, academic data, to look at your CSIP and see how you're tracking. So then it's an oversight role, to monitor our financial health and accountability of the district. So I want to be able to bring those financial reports to you, how we're tracking on the year, how we're trending on expenses and revenues and things like that. And with the year just started, a lot of the data I have to talk about today is last year's data and kind of our current reality and where we stand. So,
hey, Robert, you might introduce yourself a little bit since you're going to lead this committee.
Sure.
I'd like to know your background.
Yeah, no, that's great. So both my parents were public school teachers. That's all I know is public school education. When I went through school, I told them I was going to make a lot more money than them as teachers, and I would never teach in the classroom. And so, I graduated from Northwest Missouri State with a computer management systems degree. Worked in private industry for about 4 or 5 years, and then got my alternate certification to teach science and math in the classroom. So, right, I ended up right where I said I wouldn't. One of the reasons I did that is I missed just that camaraderie of being a coach. I played baseball at Northwest Missouri State, you know, and just being 4 or 5 years removed from that, I just missed that competition side, that camaraderie of team, and you know, there have been a lot of coaches that gave to me, so I wanted to give back as a coach. And so through the years as being a teacher, I moved into a role of a network administrator for Smithfield School District. That was almost 20 years ago. And then eventually became the technology director of Platte County School District and evolved into the technology and operations director. And through time took on more responsibility with finance. And I'm here today as your finance and operations person, and highly qualified in technology as well. So, but that's my background. I also have my SFO, which is a certification through ASBO, which is the Association of School Business Officials, which is their highest level of certification, as well as my doctorate degree. So that is my background in education. So I think I get a unique role of, you know, having been in the classroom, where there's a lot of CFOs that come from the banking side and never step foot in the classroom, go straight to this role. So I feel like I have a good balance of what other departments do, how they support the classroom, and then also what it means to a teacher to be in that classroom, and how we can best support them financially from a resource perspective. So, no, thanks for bringing that up. It's probably a good idea.
Well, I think
Give that background.
Yeah, I think people get to know you. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have 4 kids in college, so I'm broke. Paying college tuition everywhere. 2 of them's in Mizzou, one's at University of Arkansas, and one's at Missouri FCC. So that's where they all go. So, yeah. All right. Let me jump into some just some financial highlights of the district that I think is important. I'll kind of mention some current events as we go along. When you look at how we receive revenue, something unique about the district is we can't do a lot about our revenue. Meaning, if there is a company that's looking to, increase their return on investment or something like that, they might look at different ways to sell more widgets or reduce the cost of some item they're producing and create a bigger revenue stockpile. We really don't have the best ability to do that. Our revenue is pretty determined by, 1, our tax rate, 2, the assessed valuation of what we have here that covers the district in St. Joe, and then what we get from our state revenue, which is a formula that I'm going to show a little bit later on about how to receive that. So we receive over half of our revenue from local property taxes. That includes personal property tax, it includes real property tax, includes everything from commercial real estate, agriculture, and residential. And some of the things I'll just mention right now, the legislature has an emergency legislative session where they have passed a couple of bills in the House, a House Joint Resolution that basically does away with personal property tax. And so personal property tax is probably about 20 to 25% of our local revenue that we receive off of that. And so that is a huge chunk of revenue that our district and all districts around the state would lose. There's a lot of different verbiage in that House Joint Resolution now, but we're constantly, it seems like every 6 months, some sort of new House resolution is being passed that's going to erode our district's ability, not only our district, but your fire district, your ambulance district, all those districts that rely on property taxes, that those are under attack. And so I just wanted to mention that as something that we dealt with today, that we were on a webinar today about, that people are trying to make sense of right now, what that would mean for us. So, but that's important to know that those local taxes are a majority. Not every state is like that. A lot of different states, the majority of the revenue comes from the state. They have either a higher sales tax or higher, could be a property tax, could be a use tax that they use to fund schools at a higher level than we do. If you look at the number of dollars we get per student in Missouri, it's probably ranked around 46 or 47 in the nation. And so the state of Missouri overall, compared to other states, contributes a lot less than many other states do. Now, some of that could be cost of living if you factor that in, because we are in central the United States, and we're not on the coast. But if you do look at the rankings, we are towards the end. So on the left-hand side, it kind of gives you a little bit of what our total revenue was, not just the percentages, it's in the graph. And so, this is last fiscal year, so we had 82 million in local revenue, about 3.8 million in county, over 51 million in state, over 14 million in federal. And then non-current and other LEAs is just tuitional or local tax effort that might come our way for students that transfer. So, any questions on revenue and where the district receives the bulk of the revenue or how they get that? And I will go in deeper on the state one here in just a second. All right. The next slide we have is our expenditures. And this looks at how our expenditures are by object. Object is just a term that DESE uses for how you classify an expenditure. So those are broken into different areas. You can see that salaries and benefits are two of the biggest things. We're in the people business. And so when you look at our expenditures, what we spend on all of our staffing around the district is our major expense. Matter of fact, in typical years, it's 75% or more. In this year, it's not because we had expenditures from our bond that we spent on, so we had a higher cost than you normally see in a year of capital outlay. But in normal years, we don't have bond projects going on. That capital outlay is much smaller, and the piece of pie for salaries and benefits is much bigger. And so when you look at a district and look at their spending trends and looking at different things like that, the other 25% besides salary and benefits, those are things like your curriculum, your natural gas, your electric, your water, your cleaning products, cleaning equipment. There is not a lot of things that you can cut in that 25%. Software subscriptions. We can't not pay the electric bill. We can't not pay our natural gas bill. Those are things that are very hard to reduce. You can. I'm not saying there's not different things that you can reduce, but it is definitely the smallest piece of the pie when you're looking at things to bring down your expenses. So that's a breakdown of how our expenses looked last fiscal year.
Robert, is employee benefits of the state 3 million? Shouldn't that be 30 million?
On benefits, something's wrong on that value to the left.
Yeah, it's not coming up to 75%.
Yeah, I think maybe that's off by a decimal.
It is off. That number's wrong. Percent's right, the number's wrong.
Yeah.
On the left. That number got deleted there. Yeah, that's in the 30 million range.
Yeah, so I think that's just important to know.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Where are the transportation costs in this? Where do they fall?
That's a great question. So our transportation is outsourced through First Student, and so that's considered a purchase service.
Okay.
So that 11.9% is part of that transportation cost. There are districts that sway pretty vastly in that measure, meaning there's some districts that have their food service outsourced and their transportation outsourced, and there's some that have both in-house. St. Joe, we have our food service in-house, and we outsource our transportation. I don't have the full history of why we outsource our transportation, but if I had to guess, it would be the availability to have a facility to house all the buses. If you look at a lot of our buildings, they're landlocked, don't have a lot of parking spaces and things like that. My guess would be years ago that that's one of the reasons that they went to outsource. I don't know 100%, but just to have that facility and land to be able to have that infrastructure is a big piece that people look at whether they go in-house or they outsource it. So yeah, that's all under purchase service. All right, so a little bit back to our local revenue. When you look at revenue for the district, you look at it from assessed valuation. So every other year, your county assessor goes out, and what they do is they assess all of our property that's within our school district. And so that property can be either personal property, it can be commercial property, residential, or ag. And it's zoned differently depending on the county and how that property is zoned. So if you look at assessed valuation, that is how it's assessed. So let's say that you have a home that's worth $100,000. The assessed valuation would be $19,000. So it's assessed at that percentage. And then what you basically do is you take that assessed valuation divided by 100 times our tax rate. And so I just wanted to kind of show you how that assessed valuation works in the state of Missouri. So earlier when I was talking about a House resolution to remove personal property tax, you can see that that's one of the big areas we get revenue from that for local, and how that would definitely hurt our district. So the next slide kind of shows an example of how that would be calculated. So if we had a $250,000 home that was appraised at $250,000, that would be a residential property. So you're going to multiply that times the 19% valuation. They would give you $47,500. You're going to divide that value by 100, and you're going to multiply by our tax rate. So if you have a home that's worth $250,000, and that's what it's appraised at, your tax bill for that home in St. Joe would be $2,335.24. So to give you a little bit of perspective, every student in St. Joe costs $13,231. So if you are a family that owns that home, you can see that that home is only contributing a very small fraction of what it costs to educate that kid. If you have 2 kids, that cost to us is over $26,000. If you have 3 kids, it's $39,000. If you have 5 kids like I do, it's a lot of money that it costs the district to educate those kids. And so, where does that come up from? Well, the other pieces that have value that don't have kids going to the district, meaning your commercial property, your ag property, your personal, and of course then your residential is where you may or may not have kids, because there are families out there that don't have kids that send them to the district. So that is where those other dollars come from, as well as the state on how we educate a kid for over $13,000, even though one home might only bring $2,300 in revenue to the district. So any questions on assessed valuation and how we get our revenue through that process at all? Something you might have heard in the news lately, like SB 190, which is the senior citizen credit tax. So what that does is once you hit Social Security age, whatever your value of your property is, or your tax value is frozen in time, so you will pay no more than what that value is over time. I think that is well needed for senior citizens that are on a fixed income. That is great for them. You just have to know that that does reduce the amount of revenue that schools and other entities like fire protection, ambulance receive based on that. Then some of you might have heard about the stadium tax credit bill that was passed recently, SB 3. That had a provision in it where different counties around the state were frozen for their real property tax, meaning if you're in Buchanan County, the property taxes the valuation could not go by more than 5%. If you were in Clay County, it was not affected. If you were in some of the counties like in the south, next to Springfield, like Christian County, those were capped at 0%. So it was all determined about your state senator where they wanted to cap that. So what is supposed to happen with that bill is in November or April, the county commissioners of Buchanan County will put a ballot language on the November or April ballot that basically states, do you want real property valuation capped at 5%? And then the community will vote yes or no on that. And depending on that vote, that would be the cap for this county. Some of you might have seen that it was recently deemed inconstitutional. So it's going through the courts right now, so we'll see where SB 3 ends up. But that was part of that stadium tax credit incentive that they're trying to give to the Royals and Chiefs was part of that bill. So,
will that be listed on the ballot? That is part of that?
I asked the county commissioner if they're going to do it in November and April, and they said it's yet to be determined. So, but it's supposed to be on one or the other. But once we find out, we'll let everybody know. But yeah, that caps the property tax to a 5% cap.
Well, I was wondering if the language was going to include that it was for the stadiums.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if they're going to be forced to put in that or not. That's a good question. I don't know. All right. So the next slide shows a little bit about our assessed valuation and where our district has been in the past. Just after 2021 school year, all the total property in Buchanan County for our district includes personal property, residential, ag, and commercial was just over $1.1 billion. You can see through the years how that has incrementally increased. And then this last year, you can see it went up the highest it's went up in a long time at 7.8%. You've probably seen some other counties around, like Jackson County in the news, that's talked about going up 20, 30, 40%. And I think a lot of these Senate bills that have been coming through about capping at 5% is a result of what's been going on in Jackson County and some of those things where you've seen 20, 30, 35% jumps in assessed valuation for some folks. So although Buchanan County has been pretty steady and a lower constant increase, there's been some counties around Kansas City that have just skyrocketed. And so that's what I believe has prompted some of these state resolutions that's going through the State House and State Senate. So, forecasting going forward, if you look at that 5% cap for Buchanan County, even if it does pass, you can see that we haven't hit 5% except for this last year. And if you go back even 10 or 15 years, we never passed 5%. So I don't think it'll be a huge factor in Buchanan County. It would affect us this year, but in previous years it would have hit that 5% cap for us. So, any questions on assessed valuation? All right. So here's a little bit of our tax levy history. If you look at our tax levy, you can see that it's broken out by fund. And so fund accounting is something that school districts use to ensure that dollars that are dedicated to certain initiatives remain in that fund and are accountable in that fund. And just to kind of go through them real quick, we have 4 main funds in our district that we use. Now we have more than 4 because we have some funds that are sub-funds of others that we keep separate just for our own organization, but they actually, when you report to the state, they roll up to that fund. And so Fund 1 is your operational fund. You can see that the tax levy that we levy in that fund is used for our operations. It's what we use to pay salaries and benefits. I mentioned curriculum, technology, all of our ongoing utility bills. That's what that Fund 1 is used for. So you can see that has the largest levy in there. You can also see between the 2023 and 2024 school year and the 2024-25, the increase, that was from that Prop C rollback that was voted on by the community. So that's what that represents there. And then Fund 2, Fund 2 is a special or teacher's fund. So any salaries and benefits that we pay to our certified staff come out of Fund 2. If they are support staff, it comes out of Fund 1. So you're probably wondering, well, Robert, how do you generate any revenue in Fund 2 if you do not have a levy in Fund 2? Well, all of our state funding goes to Fund 2. And so anything that we get from our foundation formula that's calculated from the number of students and their attendance, and I'll go through that here in just a little bit, goes into Fund 2. So that's where that revenue comes from. We don't receive any revenue from our tax levy, which is our local income, but it all comes from our state. So that goes into Fund 2. Our Fund 3 is our debt service fund. So when the district goes out for a general obligation bond to make improvements on our HVAC or install new turf fields with tracks, that goes through our debt service fund. So anything that comes in our debt service fund or that is paid out in our debt service fund is all restricted. So that can only go towards paying debt. So anything that we receive from that tax levy goes straight to our obligations for debt payment, and that's the only thing that we pay for that. And so when you look at our different financial balances, you'll see beginning and end of your balances in Fund 3, and that's why you see those, because those are restricted for those debt payments. And then Fund 4 is a capital improvement fund. Any expenses that go through Fund 4 have to be $5,000 or more, or be some sort of like bricks and mortar project. And so you're probably wondering again, Robert, well, how do you fund anything in Fund 4 if you do not have a levy? So DESE allows the district to transfer a certain amount from Fund 1 to Fund 4 to fund those. And then once you sell a bond, even though you pay the debt in Fund 3, the allocations from that bond do go into Fund 4. So between bonding commitments and making that transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 4, that funds different initiatives that go into Fund 4. So There are some districts that put a small amount in Fund 4 from their levy, but anything that we did, let's say we did 10 cents in Fund 4, we'd be taking 10 cents away from Fund 1, so it's the same levy overall. It's just how you split it out into different funds of what you do. There are some districts that put a small amount in Fund 2. Some of those districts are ones that maybe don't get as much state revenue. They feel like they need to do that to supplant some of their expenses. Based on our expenses in 1 and 2, what we get from the state, we don't put a levy in Fund 2 either. So what you see actually here is only a levy in Fund 1 and Fund 3 is probably 60 to 70% of your school districts in the state. Most don't put anything in Fund 2 or Fund 4. Then you have your small one-offs that do overall. But this is very typical of how a district will assign those levies to the different funds. And then if you ever look on some of our financials and you're like, well, Robert, you said we don't have any other funds with these funds. We have a Fund 5 and a Fund 6 and a Fund 7. Those funds are sub-funds of Fund 1. So we have a healthcare trust, we have our food service, which is Fund 5, activity account, Fund 6. Those all roll up to Fund 1. And some districts will number them as such. They'll call Fund 1 Fund 10, and then call your activity account Fund 16. Since that starts with a 1, it's rolled up to a 1. We've done it different here. It just means that's the way we've done it. But just know that all those other funds roll up to Fund 1. So. Any questions on our tax levy history or the funds we use to allocate those to? All right, next one, state funding formula. So talk a little bit about how we get funded locally from assessed valuation and how that has grown over time. So the state funding formula is a very interesting formula. It can be pretty complex, but basically what it is our weighted daily average. I'm still asleep. And so what is your weighted average daily attendance? Well, what that is the enrollment that you have of all the students in the district times your average daily attendance rate, and then there's some weighted factors in there. If you have students with IEPs, if you have students with free and reduced lunch accounts, and if you have students that are ELD, then they create a certain weight to your average. And so there is a threshold, and so if you're not over that threshold, then you do not receive any weighting for that. If you're under, if you're over, then you receive a weighting for that threshold. And so we are over the threshold in all 3 of those areas. IEPs just a little bit, ELD, yes, and then free and reduced lunch by a bigger margin to create a weighting for us for our district. And so when you look at enrollment numbers, you might say, hey, our enrollment K through 12 is only around 10,000, but you have 10,900 is your WADA, and that's because of that weighting. And so that's how we get that number. The state adequacy target is a number that is set through the formula, and so that is the amount of dollars we get per student of that WADA. Now there are some things that take out some dollars that I'll explain here in a little bit, but that is the base number they use for this calculation. The dollar value modifier. So what that is a modifier the state uses to account for cost of living. So if you are in an area where cost of living is higher, it might be 1.05, 1.06. If you're in a spot where cost of living is lower, it might be 1.00, not get a factor with that. So that's a little bit of multiplier to give some schools closer to areas with higher cost of living a little bit more. So what the state does is they'll take that WADA, that 10,900, which is around where we're currently at, times the 7,145 SAT, times that dollar value modifier, and they'll subtract out your local effort. Well, what's your local effort? So what the state did back in 2005 when they created this is you were frozen in time, whatever amount you got from the state. So in 2005, St. Joe School District received over $33 million in local effort, which is your local tax dollars, during that time. And so that is backed out of that formula. So a lot of times when people are talking about how much you get from the state, we get 7,145 per kid. We actually don't. We get more around 4,400 per kid because that local effort is backed out from 2005. And so that totals your state funding. So it's a somewhat complex formula. It's currently being looked at right now by a state committee. So Governor Kehoe is looking to rewrite the state formula. So he has committees working right now to rewrite this whole thing. He feels like it's outdated because there is that local effort piece from 2005. He feels like we need to get something more modern. So he's calling it a modernization task force to rewrite that formula. What that ends up being, I don't know. But there'll be some districts, there'll be some winners that'll come up getting more money than they used to get. And there's gonna be some districts that are some losers, they get less than they get. So between that and the different House resolutions that are talking about personal property, you can tell right now, being in a school district, it is very nerve-wracking to hear on both sides of the coin, the two things we get most of our revenue from, state and local, are both being tinkered with right at the same time. And so it's also disheartening. You would hope that they would be talking to each other and, okay, if you're going to be changing these things on the state side, maybe on the local, we need to adjust this. No, two different people going on two different paths, and who knows which way both are going to work itself out. But from a revenue perspective, we have our eyes really closely on where that's going to end up and what that looks like from a state funding perspective and our local funding as well.
Quick question on the local effort.
Yeah.
So if we were frozen in 2005, we probably had considerably more enrollment in 2005. So probably not a great thing for us, right? In a declining enrollment
Correct.
place.
Yeah, so with that declining enrollment, that definitely hurts us as we continue. So every time, every year if we're down 50 or 100 kids, our state revenue is going to continue to drop. Yeah.
Super.
Good
Works out well.
It is a good point, yeah.
Works out well for us.
Yeah, so that brings up our next slide, actually, right into that. So here's our actual enrollment by level. I kind of broke it out a little bit purposely because, we're kind of looking at, change our middle schools to 7 and 8, attendance centers, and having K through 6 elementaries and 9 through 12. So you can see back in 2010, 2011, this is not taking effect for pre-K or any of the early childhood. It's only kindergarten through 12. We had 11,425 students. And fast forward to last year, we had 9,969. So, we dropped by about 1,500 students over the last 15 years. And so our state funding has, continued to stay flat or go down based on that. And so that shows the percent change over the year and just the total change as well. Everybody, if you look at those 2019, 2020 years, everybody dropped during COVID. That was just a trend for all districts. And I would tell you all districts are flat to losing enrollment. Birth rates are just down across the state. Look at a lot of counties. Even places that you would think would have increased enrollment in different areas are pretty flat. And then of course we lost 187 kids last year. I've looked a little bit this year, even though we haven't hit our count date yet. The official count date is the last Wednesday of September when the state takes that first official look at where you're at for your funding, because they also have a January membership date. And so I've looked a little bit. It looks like we're maybe down between 50 and 100, but it's not official till that date, so I don't want to jump the gun, but we are down a little bit again. So that student enrollment is an important piece because when you look at your district efficiencies and things like that, whether you're increasing enrollment and you're building new buildings and hiring new staff because you're increasing, or if you're dropping enrollment, you always want to right size to your enrollment over time. And that's not easy to do when you're talking about 26, 27, 28 buildings in the district that have varying amount of square footage, of age, of needs, of how you assemble those students in the most efficient way, not only operationally, financially, but educationally too. So that's an important factor. The next slide shows a little bit about kind of where we're at financially. I know you guys have probably seen a lot about our 10.02% and where we are with our reserve ratio. How did we get there? Well, yes, there were some delays in federal funding. There were some things with HVAC cost overruns, but that's kind of the in the weeds answer. From a global perspective, from a 15, 10, 5-year trend of how we got here, it really has to do with our expenditures versus our enrollment. And so I always call this the death cross. If you have declining enrollment, but yet you have increasing expenditure related to your operations, you continue to get less state funding, but yet your expenditures are increasing, it's impossible to maintain that. At some point, you're going to hit a spot where your deficits are running to a point where you do hit a 10.02%. We've hit that. And so yes, I know there's some other things we talk about how we got there, but from a big picture perspective, this is why. We continue to have declining enrollment, but our expenditures continue to increase. So we got to find a way to right-size those expenditures with our enrollment, where that's at from a buildings perspective, staffing perspective, all those things. And those are things that we want your guys' opinion on from a committee, things that we can do as a district to help right-size where we need to go to get our finances going in a better direction.
That's a good summary, though. I committed I wasn't going to say any word in here. I knew I would fail. But that's a good overview summary, in spite of there being some other noise too. That says fundamentally we've got that's something we've got to address.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at that, we're kind of looking at two phases to this. The board is tasked with giving them a budget reduction plan for this fiscal year in October. And so we've been working hard with our administration team to look at those things. It's been mostly those supplies and purchase services. That's the smallest amount of our budget that we've really crunched and looked at because, paying school starting, we already have a staffing plan in place. We were ready to bring all the kids first day of school and have those people in place. So there really is no opportunity to look at, if things shift or if people retire or resign, could we reimagine this, It's mostly purchase services and supplies, and you'll see that in the budget reduction. And then phase two is kind of what future looking. As we look to the future past this fiscal year, next fiscal year, as we look at those expenditures, how can we right size that? As we possibly reconfigure buildings and what those look like. How do we reconfigure our staff as people retire, resign, and get those expenditures to right size with our enrollment, so we can get back to a 20% reserve ratio, which is board policy DIAA and where that stands. So as we look for those future years, that's where I would love for this committee to give some ideas. Whether it's on the revenue side, which is hard to control, it's a little bit out of our control at times, and then on the expenses side, which is a lot in our control of what we're spending and how we can access that. Your guys' initial thoughts, I just wanted to give everybody kind of a baseline of where our revenue comes from, how our enrollment has trended over the years, and where our expenses have trended to this day.
Robert, is the difference on the expenditures versus enrollment graph you have here, chart, that 157 million, is the difference between that and your total expenditures on one of your first slides, is that just the funds 3 and 4 that aren't included in your debt service and capital?
I took out 3 and 4.
Yeah, makes sense.
Just included 1 and 2. So you'll see me do that often. If I show like operational expenditures, I'll just do 1 and 2 and leave 3 and 4 out. The reason for that is 3 can only be paid for debt. The revenue has to go in Fund 3, and any expenditures are only to pay off debt. So a lot of times we'll take that out of the equation. And then with 4, you have such changes in, like, let's say you ran a bond and got $30 million revenue one year. Well, then we're spending that $30 million over the next 2 fiscal years doing the projects, and it can kind of show some skewing. So a lot of times we'll just show you Funds 1 and 2.
Initially in these slides, they showed the delta between just revenue and expenditures. Is that indicative of the true delta there, or should 3 and 4 be backed out there as well?
Yeah, so that includes everything. Wasn't just 1 and 2, so that is a good point. That does include everything that we had just as a whole. And usually in Fund 3, it's only a $500,000 difference between revenue and expenses every year with fund flow and road swing, based on if we're doing a project or not. So you are correct. When you look at our, now that first one will show the first 5 or 6 years of the was. That does show all funds. Okay, you're all right. So in the future, I will keep those things consistent, so you're not going to jump in.
No, good, I just want to make sure I
Are these
understand.
all funds, or are you just fund one too? Okay. But a lot of times when you hear about, you know, hey, operating expenses or operating revenues, it's fund 1 and 2 together, is what those are.
You talked about your potential effort for budget reduction. If you compare to other school districts, other communities, whether in the state, whether similar sized communities, where do we line up?
Sure.
Where is there low-hanging fruit? Is there not?
Right.
What do you see as you look at that?
Well, I've always been one that's been very honest.
Sure.
Other districts that are our size, 10,000 students total, there's many districts that are 11,000, 12,000, some 13,000. All of them have 2 high schools. You know, Fox School District, St. Louis side has about 11,500 students. They have 2 high schools. Park Hill, Liberty, Blue Springs, all of those have 2 high schools. And so when we have 3 high schools, it takes a lot more money to run 3 different attendance centers. Anytime you open a new attendance center, you have to have front office staff, you have to have custodial staff, you have all utilities, you have your property insurance costs, you have maintenance to roofs, HVAC, asphalt, all those things continue to add cost to that. And so with our enrollment, you know, continuing to go down, us being able to have a feeder structure that has 2 high schools will be able to help us a lot. And so that's definitely the highest place when I look. So a district at the end of the year submits their ASPR's call. It's called the Annual School Board Report, Secretary's Board Report. And what it does is it allows you to take our district and compare it to other districts and where we spend at different levels. So your locations, which functions, which objects, and how you compare. And so when you look at ours compared to those districts, at the secondary level, we spend a lot more on different items than other districts do because they only have 2 high schools.
Understood, thank you.
Along those lines, district you talked about, 10,000, similar to ours. How does their assessed valuation local revenues compare with ours?
Yeah, so tax rate wise, assessed valuation wise, you know, Park Hill is higher than ours. Their tax rate is similar. They're about 4.8 something, and we're 4.91. But their assessed valuation is bigger, so they do, you know, have houses and commercial that's a greater value, so they do get more overall value than us for that reason. Not as familiar with Fox on the St. Louis side with what their assessed valuation is. I do in Blue Springs and Liberty, and theirs is higher as well.
So you said Fox in St. Louis. What area is that?
Yeah, that's just a suburb outside of St. Louis. So it's Fox High School and it's Second, are the 2 high schools in Fox School.
You know what city that's in?
It's just outside the suburb of St. Louis.
Yeah, well, I worked in St. Louis for 11 years, so I know a lot of those suburbs. I was wondering which one you're talking about.
Sure. Fox, I believe, is close to Wentzville.
Okay.
So if you know where Second and Fox high schools are at, they're right outside. Like I said, I'm not familiar with that area besides the number of enrollment they have is close to ours, and they have 2 high schools.
Yeah, well, I was in New City, superintendent of streets there for 7 years. A lot of those cities, and St. Louis is just a compilation of small cities surrounding, and that's why they're locked in. So a lot of them are very much different, but a lot of them very involved in keeping their cities up to date. And I think that's something we need to look at if we need to, I don't know whether it's our image or whatever, but there's something that we need to work on.
Right. Yeah, if you looked at the average assessed valuation of a home in this area compared to the districts I just mentioned, I think this is to Gary's point, it is definitely lower than those areas. So.
Arnold, Missouri, does that ring a bell?
Yes. Arnold's south. Yeah.
Southwest.
Down by Festus. Yeah. Okay.
Robert, one of the things that and you can always correct me, because I think one of the things, even as we talk today, that's good to know is that reserve number, because it's been confusing in our community over the years. If you remember back, the reserve number target being 20%, you know, would basically say in months, that would be, you know, 20% of 12 would be about a quarter of a year, not quite, but it'd be a couple months plus. When we're, and so what that says is we have a couple months cash that can help us with cash flow issues. Any other people, you guys are all more financial than I am. But when we dip down to a 10%, we barely have a month's worth of cash. So we spend every month just about what our reserve is. And so doesn't mean we're out in a month, but it does mean that that we're not carrying a lot of money, and that creates some level of crisis and concern. So it's important what we do to figure out how do we return that to what's the board designated and considered best practice of 20% or above.
Yeah. We get paid differently on that revenue. You know, I talk a lot about state and local being the most. With our state revenue, we're paid about an equal amount each month. So that is spread out across 12 months pretty equally. There's a little bit, you know, ebb and flow to that depending on certain programs that we might get funded for in 1 month. But our local tax effort, it all comes in December and January. And so we have a huge amount of money that all of a sudden comes into our depository that we look to invest. And so we look at 3, 6, and 9 month investments because we got to use that local to pay for the difference of what we get from state, county, and other funding sources for what we spend during the month. So that local is really what fills that gap every single month. And so that 10.02% is really only on June 30th. It's right when our fiscal year ends. It's just a reporting point. If you look at our reserve ratio in March, we'd be a lot higher than 10.02%. If you look at our reserve ratio in October and November, it's lower than 10.02 from the timing of that local influx of cash during property tax time. So that is why it's something you have to manage closely and something that's important because you want 20% on June 30th, so that way when you hit November, you still have a reserve ratio. If you're 10% on June 30th when you hit November, which is the time every bank account across all public schools is at its lowest, you have money to cash flow things you need. And so if you watched the work session last night, you noticed that I talked to the board about a resolution for a TAN loan, which is a tax anticipation note. So if you are in a situation where your cash flow is going to dip below zero during those months before you get your local tax effort, then basically what you do is you take a line of credit with the bank and you borrow what you need for those expenses for that month. You get your tax revenue in December, January, and you quickly pay that back. So it's only a loan for about a month or two, but it is something you have to pay some small interest fees on. And nothing you want to do long term.
There's been a perception, I haven't had as much this go around, but there's this pile of money in reserve that what the reality is that's really not a pile of money. It's an amount of money, and but in any business or lives, that would be very tight at 20%, and it's really tight at 10%. And so we're not having the finance committee because of that, but you guys are ambassadors of communication that's important to know and understand too.
Yeah, I wanted to give a good background just because as we start talking about budget restructuring and looking at future fiscal years, I felt like it's important to kind of understand the timing of that revenue, where we get that revenue, and some of the things that are coming up with, just today with that House Joint Resolution, where if you have connections with state representatives and people to help understand how we're funded, that each kid costs over $13,000, but the average home only brings us $2,300. Those gaps in funding are something real that we deal with, every day. And so anytime the state legislator a lot of times start making these tweaks, they don't understand the impact it has on schools. And so that's why we try to let our state reps know, here's what that means to a district like ours if you get rid of personal property tax. That's something that is taxed, by your local entities.
Didn't the board, and somebody help me, didn't they hire a lobbying firm? Or didn't we pay a lobbying firm to help promote the school districts? I mean, are we still paying them? Or, I mean, it seems like that was on the,
So our state does have a lobbyist that DESE uses, which DESE's, part of elementary education and secondary education. And so we do have a lobbyist through them that tries to be in Jeff City and, educate them on these things. So there are lobbyists working with us.
that's what, that was my question. Aren't we paying somebody to advocate?
Are you talking about the chamber, the legislative advocacy
No,
piece?
didn't they? I was thinking that there was an actual.
Our own lobbyist is what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Because we were discussing it a couple meetings ago. And we also use a lobbyist as a part of our membership through MSBA as well, as Dr. McGinnis said. And there's lots of people that advocate, on behalf of public education and our funds, but we could always use more, especially members in the community, like you guys, that's able to get accurate information.
I just wondered if we were having constant communication, if we're paying them, we ought to be getting some kind of feedback from them, I would think this all sounds very dangerous to public education across the entire state. So, I would think that we'd be asking them to please give constant feedback on what they're hearing.
We do have a very strong person from NASA, and so
Okay.
that's the webinar that we were on this morning,
Okay.
and he keeps us, so they called an emergency meeting this morning, so
Okay.
to keep us in the loop as far as what he's speaking about. But actually, right before you got there too, they'd said in Missouri, 27.8% of funding comes from the state, and Missouri is dead last in the nation for that, for state funding. So, and then they said local funding, only 4 states in the country rely more on local funds than Missouri, just to put that in perspective. But we do have somebody who advocates.
I was thinking, I just remember there was a long discussion at one of the meetings about it, about the lobbying portions.
I'm thinking you're recalling the chamber, and that's something that we're actually eliminating from the budget, that piece, because we do have those services free with MSBA and NASA
Okay.
memberships. So we're taking advantage of those opportunities, and
Okay.
they're excellent services.
Okay.
Clarifying question on the reserves.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about I think I read, maybe we had some funding that wasn't applied for timely. And so those dollars just kicked into another year, is that correct? And they're not able, it's not an accrual, you can't back it into last year, correct?
Right. So federal funding dollars from the 23-24 school year and 24-25 school year. That 23-24 school year federal funding we received in August. So that's about a $5 million payment. And the 24-25 school year that just ended, we believe we'll get that in September.
Okay. So when normalized, and everybody in here probably hates the word normalized, but when you look at things and try to look at what would that do to our reserves if we looked at it and said, hey, had these things been done timely, where would we be, right? Or
About 16% is where we would
okay.
be. Versus the
Still concerning.
Still below board policy, but not
Sounds a lot
as
better.
dire a situation.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
That's a great point.
Let me ask a question I've never asked. What about the 25-26? Will we receive that before the end of the fiscal year, June 30th?
Or gosh, we better. Because that's the top of my goal, my list, is we will apply in December. So you can apply multiple times throughout the year, but you can't apply for dollars you haven't expended yet. And so in other words, when we apply in December, it has to be for salaries, benefits, and then other like supply costs from the beginning of school in August to that point in December. And then we can apply again in March. It has to be everything from December to March. But it has to be expended, it can't be projectally expended, if that makes sense. So last year's, we were waiting the whole year and then applying in late June. And then they were kicking it back saying, no, this isn't coded right, it would take time to go back and forth. We're doing that multiple times early in the year. You will see federal funding coming this year and more in a timely manner. And you should, because the earlier you get that money, the earlier it's in our bank accounts and the more interest we're earning, the opportunity lost for us not earning interest on these last 2 years, that's a real missed opportunity that we have. So that's top of my list, make sure that federal funding is applied often, early, and correctly.
We've cleaned up those processes too since these came on board. And I do think that's already a streamlined process, more so than what we had in place last year.
Yeah.
Between academic services, HR, business office, multiple departments are involved in that. And so and then there's the software piece where we have systems not talking to each other, but we're cleaning up a lot of that mess.
And let me say this in defense of the district. Some of that was ours, and the diligence of that, we're cleaning up our part of that. Some of that was DESE too. DESE even has sent us a letter saying, hey, we know this is our fault. We know we're slow to respond. You need to make this correction, but we haven't given you any guidance on what that is. And so we're going to get our part straightened out and do it. And by doing that, we're going to make it easier for DESE to evaluate our information too. But it isn't all just on us. But certainly that's exasperated, whatever that word means, whatever that word is. I wish I hadn't said that.
DESE cost us about 3 or 4 months on that 23-24 submission.
Yeah.
The others was on us. 3 to 4 months of that was on them.
It's back to the state funding formula.
Yeah.
If you're a growing school in a growing area, beneficial, right? Because you're going back to, heck, you might not have had existence in 2005, right? Whatever the case is. So, I mean, it seems completely opposite of what schools need.
Right.
If you're a growing population, growing school, growing tax base, you're getting a bigger bite of the apple.
Right.
If it's the other way, it just keeps getting worse and worse.
So I don't know if you, at the very bottom of that page on that state funding formula, we'll talk a little about this, I didn't mention, hold harmless. So a district will not receive less money than they received in the 2005-2006 school year. So for districts that are really falling in enrollment, no matter what they got, 2005-2006, they were guaranteed to get that revenue from the state. So there's some hold harmless districts out there that are still getting that because of their enrollment was lower today than it was in 2005-2006. So they're still receiving that same payment. They're considered a hold harmless district. So I'm not saying, I won't give my opinion on the governor's rewrite of the formula. I feel like he's doing it to try to reduce the amount paid to schools. But I also understand that they called it out of date when we're dealing with 2005, 2006 data, I get it. But I hope that wasn't just an excuse just to try to lower the amount that they're looking to fund public education too. So.
I think it depends what side of the equation you're on. I mean, if you're in a growing, prosperous community, you like the formula where it is. If you're in a stagnant community that's struggling to keep students, it would seem like it's not real great for us.
Oh, one more thing. I mentioned those House joint resolution bills that were going to take away personal property tax. One of them is, the lottery proceeds to the schools. Instead of the schools getting 100% of that, they're only going to get 90% now. And it takes 10% away. So that was because it was House Resolution Bill 5, 6, 7, 8 were all related to school funding and property tax funding. So that was one of them too. So I guess you're gonna have to change their commercials. Say 90% is going to the schools, not all of them. So. Like I said, that hasn't passed through both the House and Senate, so those are just proposed things right now. So hopefully it does not pass both chambers, but they're getting close.
I just want to make sure is this date and time, I'm looking at the second Tuesday of every month at 3 o'clock, does that work for you guys? And this first one, we just kind of picked a date, but I wanted to be sure that it worked for you guys.
I think that works for me. Good for me.
Okay, well, and we'll leave it there.
Okay, so something I'll mention, so goals for next meeting. I would love to give you guys what I have is a forecasting model for future revenues and expenditures to kind of see a model of if we don't do anything and just continue on the same path, which is not happening. We've already looked at budget reductions for this fiscal year, where that would take us, and then some models of, okay, if we are able to make these changes, here's a projection to get back within board policy. And so I'd love to be able to show you that model, because I think that model can help us in the future as we get your input on, budget restructuring for future fiscal years of, okay, it has some great triggers in there to say, okay, if we, have health insurance increases of this percentage, but yet we have salaries increase of this percentage, and we're able to assume this assessed valuation or state funding formula, here's how it projects out. And you can put different inputs in just to kind of see how those project in the future. And I think it'll be a great tool for us to use as people have different ideas about things we can do, and we can use that to see how things might project out. So that was my plan for the next meeting when we meet in October. Of course, we'll be on the heels of giving the board our budget reduction plan that we have for this fiscal year, and then starting to have discussions for what that looks like restructuring in the future too. So.
Probably be good too at that meeting, because it's such a good group to communicate, to talk about what the board's considering for the two-school model. This committee's not just about facilities, but since that's going to be really dug into between now and the end of October, probably be good to do some overview of what that's looking like.
Okay, we can certainly push off the forecasting piece and do more of a modeling for future feeder systems and stuff like that at the next meeting. Do you feel like that would be more pertinent?
Well, I just think it'll be important that we at least address that here and equip folks. Absolutely. I mean, today it equips them to say, well, why are you doing anything? Well,
right.
Some more information about what's being considered, and you'll start to hear more things about that. There's a open forum. What's the date of that? Does anybody remember that? Is it October 20th or?
Kind of late.
I think that forecasting model would be very helpful though for you guys to see where you pay the following year if nothing is done, because we looked at it internally, but I think it would be great for you guys to be informed with that. Projections in the future.
I assume the two high school model is still including, we've got more than just high schools that are problematic. We've still got the same number of buildings we had when we had considerably more. So we've got all things are on the table still, I assume, right?
Right. We're looking at the system as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great point, because Lafayette Central and Benton are all still going to be those buildings. It's just two of them will be high schools, one will be a junior high, and that helps restructure the whole thing so you can actually close some buildings, some elementary buildings are the ones that get closed.
Retired.
So retired. Yes.
Repurposed, right?
Repurposed.
Or retired. More honor, I think, in that word than close is so old. Trying to change our language. Thank you guys for being here. Is there anything that you want out of us in the future? Something you're just really curious about and want us to bring to the next one?
I would really like to see all of the numbers. If you're going to do the high school thing that you're talking about, I'd really like to see, this is going to save X amount of this. I would really like to see the real numbers. And if you're going to close the future buildings, what that's going to actually save the district, then you've got to add in your extra transportation costs, you've got to add in, other different factors have to be added back in. But just really almost just simpler explanation of this is why. This is going to save us this much money, annually. This is why we're going to have to do that. To see if it really.
Absolutely.
We did talk about that last night. The tough part of that is staffing.
Sure.
And just knowing kids who are ELD services or on IEPs with special education, so all of special programming, just all of those pieces, but we can give some rough estimates what that will look like. And as far as like utilities and things like that, those are more accurate numbers. Yeah, we're preparing that right now for the board as well.
So will the schools that you close just be off the district budget? I mean, you'll sell them, or will those to be expenses of buildings sitting empty, or will you turn them into like offices? I'm not sure.
We won't want to maintain them, I'm sorry. I'll let you go.
No, I mean, I was just curious, because to close them, I can understand closing them and it saves on staff, but then if the buildings just sit there empty, are you still going to have expenses going into them sitting there
Dr. Guest
empty?
is right. Yes, you can reduce your total expenses, but to really take that expense away is to sell the building.
Right.
And sell the land.
Right.
And so the board would be the final
Right.
deciding factor. We probably have a recommendation for that. But fiscally, it would help us to sell
Right.
those properties.
Well, and that's what makes sense, is because I know in the past they've closed buildings, but then they end up using them for something else. So has there really been a savings?
Right.
Because they're still maintaining them. I mean, there's still
Absolutely.
the overhead of it, so.
HVAC, roofing, asphalt, all
Right.
those things you have to do.
Right. So that was my question.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What's the date that determination has to be made for these decisions?
I would defer to the board on that.
Facilities.
Yeah.
So the plan is to talk about that at the September board meeting, talk about it at the October work session, and the board is planning on making a decision at the October board meeting.
Fourth Monday in October is the target. That board meeting.
Per board policy, whenever we close, repurpose, or reorganize a school system, we have to have a public hearing. And so the public can come in and voice concerns or state their feelings and thoughts about it. So that will be scheduled as well.
Because one of the ideas, Gary, is it may happen as soon as next fall. The realignment might be as soon as next fall, and so we have to, we can't delay that too long if we're going to try to hit the target. And that target is self-imposed. We wouldn't have to, but if we're going to make that difference, we have to then give the administration time to figure out how do they make those necessary adjustments.
Yeah, you have to give everybody time.
Yeah,
That's talking about students, parents, families, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and so it's, there's a little self-imposed urgency. The change in the reserve creates some additional urgency, but we're not going to make a decision that's just based on urgency or in a hurry, but we are going to try to be timely. So we worked on it last night. The district worked hard to make some preparation. They're going to present again at the end in September, and encourage you to be at those board meetings if you can, or watch them. We're going to do that at the work session in October, and that's why I'm saying specifically in here, I want this group to have kind of executive level look at that, exactly the same things you said, Teresa. And because we're going to need, you know, a key to the potential success of this is going to be communication in the community. How this gets communicated and the vision of that, and how it sets us up for the future. So I want to make sure you guys are equipped to help us communicate that, if that's the way we go.
From a forecasting model, it'd kind of be nice to know what decision you're making. And you could adjust the forecast based on those decisions and show us some more realistic numbers or.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That'll help us.
Makes sense.
Back to your question though of what you need out of us, I'm not speaking for the rest of the finance committee, so sorry if you guys don't agree with what I'm about to say, but really it's just clarity and honesty on what you guys need. I was stopping myself from asking a bunch of inquisitive questions that I don't necessarily think are in scope of this committee.
You and me both.
Yeah, I want to stay on track as we can, but I think for us to just be an honorary committee or a ceremonies committee would be a waste of everyone in this room's time, waste of the community's time. As we support the board and as we support the administration, please let us know how we can help. We don't want to guess. I think we would all like to be tools of both our experiences as well as beacons in the community to try to help with whatever we can. So just any sort of honesty and clarity is appreciated.
I think right now, honestly, the things I mentioned, as you hear about SB3 and that election coming up for Buchanan County on that 5% cap, and these joint House resolutions that, you know, it's 5, 6, 7, and 8 that are coming through the state, to be a voice and be an advocate for anybody you know to tell. A lot of people don't even know this is going on. They have no idea that, oh, personal property tax is on the chopping block for, all these taxing entities that rely on that. So to help us share that communication with the community, if you have any personal relationships with any representatives, that really does make a difference with if these things cross the finish line or not. Because they're listening to their constituents. If they're hearing people, if they don't hear anybody upset about it, they're just gonna pass it on. If they hear people upset and understand how it affects them, then they're gonna think twice about their vote in Jeff City. So to me, that's a big one.
And if I may actually add to that, like, I would just like if the members of the committee, could be loud and accurate about the information given at the meetings. If you're able, to let individuals and entities in the community truly know, look, it's our lifeline and we're losing it. Advocate for public education, advocate for these bills, advocate as much as you can. As he mentioned, if there are no advocates, we're going to lose our funding, and then where will we be?
Well, and it's not our plan either to leave the community out of these decisions. So we must do what the policy says and have contact with the community and hear from you. So that's imperative. We can't do it without that. And we don't intend to.
And if anybody wants to offshoot on something like you were mentioning, just schedule time with me. I'll bring out all sorts of data and dig in.
I really wanted to ask why you think K through 6 is dropping faster than the other two segments, but I didn't want to take us too far off track.
Birth rate.
Got it, 10-4.
Yeah, birth rate.
I haven't asked.
Get to work.
Careful, we're still in zone coverage and.
I have one ask.
I'll give Rick a call.
Yeah.
As you are learning about our financial reality right now, I would appreciate any advocacy, even with your small groups of people that you know. I still see things on social media, and I think there's a false hope that we have these funds somewhere, and even internally with our staff, and who are struggling with if we're removing software that they've been using. I mean, all of those things that we're able to do internally with purchase services or professional learning or these software type pieces, it saves people. And we are in the people business, and so I think any advocacy you can do on that front, as far as educating people within your own groups, that we truly are in a situation, not trying to cause fear, but also want people to be understanding of the reality of why we have to go to 2 high schools. It has to happen. I was presenting at Southside Rotary, and someone asked me, well, what do we have to do to keep 3 high schools open? And I said, we would need more students. And that's just the truth. That's what would get us to 3 high schools. We would have to have more students. So I think any help that you can do in that regard of just educating people of our current situation would be helpful for us as well.
There's not a voluntary tax line, is there, of people wanting to pay more, right?
There's not.
Right.
Now, if you want to
How
start
would you know
that,
if there's anybody in it?
That'd be great, yeah.
Hey, I might add one thing to this, actually. The other thing this does, Joe, is it gives you a chance, and I think we should leave a little room in the agenda every time to say, these are questions I've heard or I have personally. And, we've got the superintendent here and what I'd call the CFO. This is a little bit of an inside, under the covers thing. This gives you a chance to ask a question that maybe you're hearing. And today, we talked about saying, we've got to kind of cover what's the basis. But I think there needs to be room in every meeting to say, if there's tough questions you have or that are out there, this is going to be a forum. You can speak it up in a small group.
Great.
Yeah.
we appreciate each of you, so thank you for being here.
I know it's during, in middle of the day type thing, so.
So I did have one question as far as, because we were talking about, our communications with the community, and previously a audit had been proposed, and I wasn't sure if that would be something within the scope of what we might recommend towards the board, is looking into potential avenues for that and deciding whether, not deciding of course, but recommending one way or the other.
Yeah. So every public school district is required to have an audit. And so we are audited every year by KPM. And so there have been talk in previous board meetings about, kind of have an extra layer, a third set of eyes, come look at some things. MSBA, who is Missouri School Board Association, their executive financial director, Linda Quinley, is going to come in and basically look through our financials, look at our SBR, look at some previous year trends, and come back to the board and kind of give some findings or opinions that she has. Of course, some of those opinions are going to be obvious. Say your reserve ratio is way too low, we need to bring that 20%. But some other things that can help us from an internal perspective. She's been the CFO for Columbia School District and Kansas City, Missouri School District, so very large districts like ourselves. And with her experience, I think she can help give the board some perspective of, where we need to go in the future. So,
Yeah, I think that'll go on, especially with the public.
Good deal?
Awesome.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys
Thank you.
too.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.